At a prestigious gala, a wealthy donor publicly insults a black woman, dismissing her presence as unworthy. Guests react with whispers, shock, and silence, while the arrogant donor basks in his imagined superiority. But the woman's calm dignity holds the weight of a secret that slowly unsettles the room, ending with a revelation that flips the balance of power and leaves everyone breathless. "We don't let people like you sit at this table." The words were delivered with the same casual cruelty as one might swat a fly. They rang out across the glossy expanse of the ballroom, bouncing off glass walls and polished marble floors. For a split second, the chatter of over 200 distinguished guests faltered. Glasses hovered mid-air. Silver forks hovered above plates of smoked salmon and roasted asparagus. The string quartet in the corner played on, but even their melodies seemed to stumble at the sound. The speaker, Gregory Walters, sat heavy in his tuxedo, his stomach pressing against his vest as if his wealth itself had grown a body. He leaned back in his chair with an air of entitlement, his gold cufflinks catching the chandelier's light. He had built his reputation not on kindness or intellect, but on the size of his donations and the smug arrogance that came with them. And now, with a smirk stretching thin across his lips, he had decided to humiliate someone in public. The target of his scorn stood quietly in front of him, a black woman in a flowing black gown, her natural hair neatly tied back, her shoulders squared with quiet strength. She hadn't yet spoken a single word. Her face remained unreadable, but her silence carried a weight that was almost unnerving. Gregory, oblivious, pressed on. "This table is for donors, for people who matter. Perhaps you didn't get the memo." He gestured with his wine glass, sloshing the liquid dangerously close to the rim. "You'll find plenty of space near the back of the hall." Laughter bubbled at the edges of the table, nervous, not joyful. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some pretending to look at their phones, others exchanging glances. The insult had been public, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. From the far side of the room, a young server hesitated mid-step, her tray of champagne flutes trembling in her hands. Two women at a nearby table leaned in toward one another, whispering, "Did he just say that? Out loud?" The black woman remained still, her posture calm, her expression unbroken. She reached into her clutch and drew out an invitation card, thicker and more ornate than the rest, gold embossed with the seal of the Hope Rising Foundation. She placed it on the table in front of Gregory with deliberate care. The card shone under the chandelier like a small beacon. Gregory glanced at it and chuckled. "Nice forgery," he muttered, pushing it back across the table with the tip of one finger as though it were dirty. The scrape of the card sliding against the polished wood cut through the ballroom louder than the music. She picked it up slowly, her fingers steady. Then she leaned forward, just enough for her voice to carry across the table without raising it. "I didn't come here to belong," she said. Her voice was calm, resonant, the kind that made silence lean closer. "I came here because this house was built on my vision." Gasps rippled around the table. Forks clattered against plates. Someone stifled a cough. Someone else muttered, "What did she just say?" Gregory blinked, caught off guard by the poise in her tone. His smirk faltered, but only for a fraction of a second before he forced it back. "Vision?" He scoffed. "That's cute. People like you don't build things. Your guests in places like this, I keep them running." He jabbed his chest with his thumb. "My money makes this whole show possible." Her eyes locked on his, steady and unblinking. "Your money bought you a ticket," she said softly, each word carved with precision. "But I own the table you're sitting at." The words dropped into the ballroom like a thunderclap. The laughter died instantly. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The violinist's bow screeched faintly against the strings, breaking the harmony. The servers froze in their paths Every eye in the room turned to her, and then to Gregory. For the first time, Gregory's hand shook as he tried to lift his wine glass. He masked it with a laugh, but the laugh rang hollow, strained. His cheeks reddened under the chandelier's glare. Across the room, the master of ceremonies stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. The crackling sound made the tension vibrate harder. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "please welcome the founder of the Hope Rising Foundation." All heads swiveled back to the woman in black. Gregory's jaw slackened. His smug smile vanished, leaving behind only the raw panic of a man who realized too late he had played the wrong game. His eyes darted toward the stage, then back at her, as if begging for the truth to be false. But it wasn't false. The woman lifted her chin slightly, a gesture so subtle yet so powerful it seemed to shift the entire energy of the room. She walked toward the stage, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Each step echoed like a drumbeat of justice. Guests whispered in waves, "She's the founder? All this is hers?" Gregory sat frozen, sweat forming at his temples. His hand still clutched the wine glass, but the glass was empty. He had drained it without realizing. His arrogance, his crown was slipping by the time she reached the stage. The entire hall was silent, the spotlight following her ascent. She turned to face the audience, her expression poised, commanding, impossible to ignore. Gregory slouched lower in his chair, invisible now in the very room he once believed he owned. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. And as she placed her hands on the podium, the cliffhanger of the evening solidified in the air. This was no ordinary guest. This was no victim of casual cruelty. This was the woman who had built everything around them, and Gregory Walters had just tried to erase her. The hall had not yet recovered from the announcement. The words "founder of the Hope Rising Foundation" still rang in the air like an echo that refused to die. Guests leaned into one another, voices low but urgent, as though gossiping at a funeral where respect still demanded whispers. "She's the founder? Since when? How did none of us know?" Gregory didn't, he couldn't have known. Every whisper was a knife twisting deeper into Gregory Walters' pride. He sat stiffly in his chair, his hand clenched around the stem of his empty wine glass. The arrogance that had once filled his body like armor now cracked with every sideways glance he caught. The woman he had dismissed, mocked, humiliated, was not only the rightful guest but the architect of the very empire he pretended to support. At the stage she stood tall, the spotlight reflecting against her black gown like liquid silver. Her eyes scanned the room, not with vengeance but with clarity. She could see the embarrassment painted across faces, the forced smiles of the wealthy trying to mask their shock. Her voice came steady, soft but carrying across every table. This foundation was built to uplift voices often silenced. It was born from a dream that dignity and opportunity should belong to everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the privileged, not just the loudest. The words cut deeper than any insult Gregory could have hurled. They weren't aimed at him directly, yet every syllable seemed to pin him to his chair. Around him, the guests nodded politely, some clapped softly. Others turned their gaze toward him, their expressions betraying the thought they all shared but dared not say aloud. He tried to erase her. He failed. Gregory shifted in his chair, forcing a smile. "Well," he muttered to the man beside him, "anyone could have made that mistake. Who even knew who she was?" But his companion did not reply. He only adjusted his tie and leaned away, as though proximity itself was dangerous. The woman continued, "Some of you are here tonight because you believe in the cause. Others are here because your reputation depends on being seen at events like this. And some," she paused deliberately, her eyes sweeping the room, "are here to remind others where they do not belong." A ripple passed through the crowd. It was not anger, it was recognition. Eyes darted toward Gregory without. Subtlety now, and his throat tightened. But dignity, she said, her voice firming, cannot be taken by insult. It cannot be reduced by arrogance. It is carried every day by those who have learned to walk through doors not meant for them. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling with force. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, smiling, eager to be aligned with her words. Their faces shone with the relief of absolution if they clapped hard enough. Perhaps they too could escape complicity in what they had just witnessed. Gregory clapped too, his palms smacking together loudly, desperately, but his face burned as he realized no one was watching him. Every eye was locked on her, every ounce of admiration pulled from his orbit and given to hers. At the back of the room, a young intern whispered to her friend, "She handled that better than anyone else." "Could have." Another added, "She didn't even raise her voice. That's power." Gregory's stomach churned. He poured himself another glass of wine, spilling a drop on his cuff. His hand trembled as he lifted it. He told himself he was still important. Still a VIP. Still the man with the checkbook. But the thought tasted bitter. From the stage, she concluded, "Hope Rising is not about me. It is about every person told they do not belong, every person who chooses to stay anyway. Tonight is not about wealth. It is about worth." The applause roared again, louder, longer, echoing up to the chandeliers. The sound pressed against Gregory's chest like a weight. He leaned toward a woman on his right. "She's dramatic, isn't she? Playing the crowd. That's all this is, performance." But the woman only smiled politely and shifted her chair further away. Gregory's laugh faltered. For the first time, he noticed how empty the space around him felt. No one leaned closer anymore. No one sought his approval. His throne had shrunk into a corner chair at a table too big for him. The woman on stage stepped back from the podium, her speech complete. As she descended the steps, guests rose from their seats to greet her, hands outstretched, voices eager. To align themselves with her presence, Gregory remained seated. He considered rising, considered offering his own apology, but the thought curdled in his throat. If he stood now, every eye would cut him down. If he stayed seated, he could pretend. None of it had touched him. Yet both choices made him smaller. The whispers continued, louder now, no longer afraid to hide. Walters embarrassed himself. He didn't know who she was. Money doesn't buy respect. Not tonight. Each word landed like a hammer, breaking apart the arrogance that had shielded him for years. For the first time in decades, Gregory Walters felt the one thing he had always despised, invisibility, and the night had only just begun. Gregory Walters had spent his entire life mastering the art of being untouchable. At boardrooms, cocktail parties, charity dinners, his wealth had always been enough to silence criticism and drown discomfort. Tonight, however, something was different. His laughter had no weight. His presence no longer commanded. Every time he raised his glass, fewer eyes met his. Where once people leaned in for his approval, now they leaned away. Conversations curving like rivers avoiding a stone. The ballroom gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble. But for Gregory, it might as well have been a cage. The whispers chased him in every corner of the room. He mocked her? Doesn't he know who pays for all this? She built it. He just signed checks. Gregory ground his teeth and forced another smile, the muscles in his cheeks aching with the effort. He told himself these whispers were fleeting, that people had short memories. Tomorrow, another scandal would rise, and his would be forgotten. And yet, every passing glance contradicted him. At the far end of the room, the founder moved like a quiet flame. She didn't seek attention, yet it followed her anyway. Guests surrounded her, eager to shake her hand, to be photographed in her glow. Her smile was warm but measured, her words careful yet magnetic. She had no need to raise her voice. Determined, very air bent toward her. Gregory hated it. He drained his wine glass in one long gulp, the burn down his throat harsher than he'd expected. His hand trembled slightly as he set the glass down, and he quickly tucked it into his lap, hoping no one noticed. But people noticed everything tonight. At his table, a man named Charles, once his golfing companion, once his ally in every boardroom. Vote cleared his throat. Gregory, he said carefully, you might want to smooth this over, publicly, before it grows. Gregory turned sharply. Smooth what over? I made a harmless comment. No one knew who she was. She did. Charles cut in softly. His eyes darted toward the founder across the room. And now everyone does, Gregory bristled. So what? I've given more money to this foundation than half the room combined. They'll forget. Charles didn't respond. Instead, he excused himself and walked toward the founder's circle, slipping easily into her orbit, abandoning Gregory without a second glance. It stung worse than the whispers. Gregory's fingers drummed against the tablecloth. He leaned toward the woman seated. On his left, a socialite he'd known for years. Can you believe this? He muttered, forcing a chuckle. People are acting like I committed a crime. I was joking, for God's sake. But she only nodded politely, her eyes fixed across the room at the founder. Her lips curled into a smile, but not for Gregory. He realized then that his words no longer stuck to anyone. They slid off like water on polished glass. The master of ceremonies returned to the microphone, announcing the next part of the program, an award presentation for donors. Gregory straightened in his seat, relief flooding him. This was his moment proof that his money still carried weight. His name was called third, and he strode to the stage with his head high, forcing a grin into place. The applause was polite but thin. His hands tightened around the plaque they handed him, its weight insignificant compared to the silence that trailed behind him. When the founder's name was announced, however, the room erupted. Applause thundered against the walls, echoing like a storm. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, whistling. Gregory stood frozen at the edge of the stage, the sound battering his pride. She stepped onto the platform, her presence calm but commanding. She accepted her award with grace, offering a quiet nod. And though she didn't look at him, Gregory felt her shadow stretch across him like judgment. When she spoke into the microphone, her words held no malice, only truth. We honor those who give not just their wealth, but their respect. For respect is the foundation upon which every gift is built. The applause roared again. Gregory's chest tightened. He felt his plaque turn into lead in his hand, heavier by the second. As they stepped off stage, he tried to catch her eye. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, to twist the moment back in his favor. But she passed him without pause, her gaze fixed ahead, her dignity untouchable. The rejection stung more than the crowd's judgment. Back at his table, Gregory forced another laugh, another comment, another round of false bravado. But the truth grew louder in his mind. The crown he had worn for so long was slipping, and no one was reaching to steady it. He glanced across the room once more, watching as she laughed softly with a group of young interns, their eyes filled with admiration. And for the first time, Gregory Walters felt the crown crack. Gregory Walters sat stiffly in his chair, his fingers drumming against the polished oak table. The ballroom around him shimmered with light and laughter, but none of it touched him anymore. His ears caught every note of music, every laugh, every clink of glass, and behind it all, the endless undertone of whispers. They say he mocked her. I heard he dismissed her work entirely. Funny, isn't it? The man who thought his money could buy respect. Gregory's jaw clenched. He wanted to leap up to silence them all, to remind the room who had paid for the marble under their feet and the chandeliers above their heads. But he remained seated, his pride stiffening his spine even as the humiliation gnawed at his chest. Another toast was raised at the far end of the room. This one wasn't for him. It was for her, the founder. She stood surrounded by people who once orbited Gregory himself, Charles, the board's vice president, a handful of donors, even 2 senators. Their faces glowed with admiration as they listened to her quiet words, leaning in as if every syllable mattered. Gregory tried to remember the last time anyone leaned toward him like that. He reached for his wine, but the glass was empty. Annoyed, he signaled for a waiter, but the young man hesitated before approaching, as though serving Gregory had become optional. The insult burned deeper than the whispers. Another, Gregory snapped, shoving the glass forward. His voice cracked slightly, betraying his frustration. The waiter nodded quickly, retreating like a soldier desperate to leave the battlefield. Gregory leaned back, forcing a laugh. He turned to the couple seated nearest him, eager to reclaim some sense of authority. Unbelievable, isn't it? The way everyone's fawning over her? I mean, yes, she's done some work, but let's be honest, I've been the lifeblood of this foundation for years. The husband coughed into his napkin. The wife offered only a thin smile before excusing herself to go greet the founder. Gregory's laughter died in his throat. He felt the floor shift beneath him, not literally, but in the way people shifted around him, away from him. Like he was a stone thrown into a pond, and now the ripples were pushing everyone outward. He needed to act, to remind them all who he was. When the master of ceremonies announced a short intermission before the next presentation, Gregory seized his chance. He rose from his chair and crossed the room, his stride sharp, determined. He would take control of the narrative. He found the founder near the dais, speaking with a group of interns, young, wide-eyed, dressed in simple suits. They hung on her words, nodding, smiling, laughing when she did. Gregory cut in, his voice louder than necessary. Well, isn't this charming? Our founder inspiring the next generation. The group fell silent, eyes shifting between the two of them. The founder looked up, her expression calm, unshaken. Gregory, she said evenly, I trust you're enjoying the evening. Enjoying? He forced a laugh, though it came out brittle. I'd enjoy it more if people remembered who keeps the lights on in this building. The words landed like stones dropped in water. The interns glanced at each other, uncomfortable. The founder didn't flinch, but the silence that followed was heavier than any rebuke. Finally, she said, respect, Gregory, is not paid for. It is earned. Her voice was soft, but it cut sharper than any knife. One of the interns, barely in his 20s, murmured, She's right. Another nodded. Their small agreement, so public, so unafraid, made Gregory's face flush red. Young people, Gregory sneered. They think they know everything. Let's see how far your respect carries you when the bills are due. He turned on his heel and stalked away, but the damage was done. The intern's whispers followed him, and he knew others had seen, had heard. Back at his table, his wine waited. He snatched it up, drinking too quickly, but the bitterness only deepened. He glanced toward the founder again, expecting her to look shaken, diminished. Instead, she was laughing with the interns, her smile bright, her voice light. The tension he had brought into the circle had vanished the moment he left. She was untouchable. Gregory's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he felt smaller than the waiters, smaller than the interns, smaller than anyone. In the glittering hall. His money had never bought that kind of loyalty. His donations had never bought that kind of love. The music swelled as the orchestra began another piece. Guests drifted to the dance floor, partners spinning under chandeliers. Gregory sat alone, his plaque heavy on the table beside him, its polished surface reflecting only his own scowl. He picked it up, turning it in his hands. The engraved words praised generosity and leadership, but in the reflection he saw a man losing both. A voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Charles again. "You're losing them, Gregory," he said quietly, almost regretfully. "If you want to keep your seat on the board, you'd better start listening instead of talking." And then he was gone, vanishing into the crowd like so many others. Gregory's hand tightened around the plaque until his knuckles whitened. The cracks in his crown were no longer invisible. They were spreading, widening, threatening to shatter everything he had built. And for the first time in his gilded life, Gregory Walters didn't know how to stop it. Gregory had always believed. Reputation was like armor, polished, gleaming, impenetrable. Tonight, though, it felt like that armor had cracked, and every whisper in the hall slid through the openings like blades. He sat rigid in his chair, trying to convince himself this was temporary, that people's fascination with the founder would fade. He was the one with money, with connections, with influence. He had weathered storms before. This would be no different, and yet his palms were damp, his collar too tight. The master of ceremonies returned to the dais, announcing the next segment, a recognition of those who built the foundation's legacy. Gregory straightened. Finally, this was his moment to reclaim the spotlight. The screen behind the dais flickered to life with a slideshow. Faces appeared. Donors, volunteers, staff members. And then heard the founder receiving her first award. Decades ago. The crowd applauded warmly. Gregory's photo appeared next. Younger, sharper, standing beside a politician at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The applause was polite, brief. He swallowed hard. The slideshow continued. More faces, more cheers. But when the founder's picture appeared again, this time hugging a child, outside a clinic, there was a surge of applause that dwarfed all the rest. People even stood, clapping as though she were in the room with them. Gregory's jaw tightened, until his teeth ached. When the lights came back up, conversation filled the air. Gregory leaned toward Charles, determined to reassert himself. "Notice how they cherry-pick those images? They're crafting a narrative. I've done far more than what they showed." Charles gave him a tired, pitying look, and didn't reply. Instead, he rose and crossed the room toward the founder, leaving Gregory mid-sentence. The humiliation was sharper this time. Public. Naked. Gregory drained his wine and ordered another, though his words slurred slightly when he gave the command. The waiter didn't meet his eyes. He tried to focus on the speeches that followed, but his mind kept circling back to the founder's calm words earlier. Respect is not paid for. It is earned. It infuriated him. It haunted him. It clung to him. Like smoke he couldn't wash off. When the break came again, Gregory decided he couldn't sit passively any longer. He needed to remind people why they respected him. He needed to act. He rose and crossed to a small cluster of younger donors. They were laughing about something, drinks in hand, their suits less expensive than his, but their energy undeniable. "Gentlemen," Gregory said, forcing a smile, "let me offer you some advice. If you want to succeed in this world, you need to learn one thing. Money talks. Forget the sentimental speeches. Forget the theatrics. At the end of the day, who do you think keeps the lights on?" He expected nods, agreement, even admiration. Instead, one of them, barely 30, raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, sir, it seems the founder keeps more than the lights on. She keeps people inspired, and that's why we're here." The others chuckled in agreement. Gregory's face flushed hot. He opened his mouth to retort, but the young man had already turned his back, dismissing him with the kind of casual indifference Gregory had only ever reserved for others. He stood frozen, the sting sharper than any insult. Behind him, laughter rippled through the ballroom again. He couldn't tell if it was about him, but in his mind, it was. Every laugh, every glance, every whisper, they were all daggers. He made his way back to his table, each step heavier than the last. The room seemed brighter somehow, almost mocking, as though the chandeliers themselves had turned against him. At his table, the plaque still waited. He picked it up, staring at the engraved letters. For generosity and leadership. The words mocked him now. Generosity had been nothing but a check. Leadership had been nothing but arrogance. He set it down with a thud. Another toast rang out across the hall. This time it was spontaneous. Guests lifted their glasses, calling the founder's name, praising her resilience, her vision, her humanity. Gregory didn't raise his glass. He couldn't. His hand trembled too much. For the first time in decades, he felt invisible. Not feared, not admired, simply irrelevant. He closed his eyes, the sound of their laughter pressing in, suffocating. The storm he had dismissed as whispers had broken open, and now he was standing in the downpour with nothing to shield him. And deep in his chest, beneath the armor of pride, a thought he had never allowed himself to consider before flickered to life. What if I've already lost? The ballroom had shifted in tone. Earlier, Gregory had commanded glances with his mere presence. Now those same glances cut through him like knives. People whispered with their hands half covering their mouths, and when he passed, they pretended not to see him. Still, Gregory refused to surrender. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his tie, and forced the swagger back into his walk. I am Gregory Steele, he reminded himself. This is my stage. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before dessert is served, we'd like to invite a few words from Mr. Steele, our generous patron. At once, the room quieted. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. For a moment, Gregory felt the old fire return. This was his chance to reclaim the crown. He rose, plaque in hand, and strode toward the podium. The applause that followed was thin, polite at best, but Gregory chose to hear it as validation. Thank you, he began, his voice smooth, practiced. It is an honor to support an institution that has brought so much good to this city.
I
have given much of my time, my resources, and my energy to ensure this organization thrives. Without benefactors like myself, I dare say it would not exist in the same capacity today. He paused, expecting cheers. Instead, silence stretched. A cough echoed from the back. Gregory's smile stiffened. He pressed on. Now I know many of. You admire our founder, and rightly so. Her work was admirable. But let's not pretend vision alone builds hospitals, funds scholarships, or keeps programs alive. It takes capital. It takes men willing to put their wealth on the line. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we are all here tonight. A murmur rippled through the audience. Not applause - discomfort. From the corner of his eye, Gregory saw the founder tilt her head, her calm expression unchanged, as if his words bounced off her like stones thrown into a lake. A young woman near the front whispered to her companion, just loud enough for others to hear, "Funny. I thought we were here to celebrate her legacy, not his wallet." Laughter bubbled from the surrounding tables. Gregory's chest tightened. His face flushed red. He gripped the podium harder. Respect is earned, yes, but don't forget, money keeps respect alive. The words came out sharper than intended, almost venomous. This time the murmurs grew louder. A man near the back muttered, "Money can't buy humility." The laughter that followed was unmistakably directed at Gregory. He stumbled over his closing remarks, ending far earlier than planned. As he stepped down from the podium, the applause was scattered, perfunctory. Some didn't even clap at all. He returned to his seat, his jaw locked, his hands trembling. Charles leaned in. "Gregory," he whispered urgently, "you've got to stop. You're only making it worse." "Worse?" Gregory hissed. "I am the reason this place even has a roof." "And they laugh at me? At me?" Charles looked at him with an exhaustion that cut deeper than any insult. "They laugh because you don't see it. You think power is control. But look around, control is slipping through your fingers. And the more you tighten your grip, the more it crumbles." Gregory turned away, unwilling to hear. But Charles's words lingered. Later that evening, Gregory escaped to the balcony, needing air. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the railing, glittering like jewels he once thought he owned. The founder appeared beside him. Silent at first, her presence calm, steady. "You spoke of respect tonight," she said finally. "But you mistake it for obedience. Respect is not the silence of those beneath you. It is the trust of those beside you." Gregory clenched his fists. "And what do you know of power? Without men like me, your vision would have died years ago." She turned, her eyes soft yet piercing. "Without people believing in the vision, your money would have been meaningless. You wanted to build an empire. I wanted to build a family. Tonight shows which survives." Gregory's throat tightened. He wanted to lash out, to remind her of his wealth, his connections, his name. But the words caught. Behind them, laughter drifted from the ballroom again. This time it felt sharper, aimed at him even across the distance. The founder touched the railing lightly. "The crown you wear is cracking, Gregory. You can patch it with gold, but it will always crumble if there's no heart beneath it." And with that, she left him standing alone in the cold night air, the city lights no longer glittering, but glaring. Gregory leaned on the railing, his chest heaving. For the first time in years, he felt something deeper than anger. He felt the weight of collapse pressing down, whispering truths he had fought his whole life to silence. The crown was slipping, and he could no longer pretend otherwise. The music inside the ballroom swelled again as dessert was served. Crystal glasses clinked. Forks scraped against porcelain, and the hum of conversations filled the air. But Gregory Steele sat stiffly at his table, untouched plate before him, his jaw locked in a silent war. Every word, every laugh, every sideways glance felt aimed at him. He had once thrived in these rooms, basked in the glow of admiration and envy. But now, every face seemed sharpened into a blade. Charles returned from the bar with 2 drinks, sliding one toward Gregory. "You need this." Gregory shoved it away. "I need none of their pity," Charles sighed, rubbing his temple. "It's not pity, Greg. It's distance. They don't want to be seen on your sinking ship." Gregory snapped his head toward him, eyes narrowing. "I am not sinking. I am Gregory Steele. Do you hear me? My name carries weight these people can only dream of." Charles's reply was quiet, steady. "Names don't carry weight forever. Not if you keep dragging them through the mud." The words stung. Gregory gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles reached. At that moment, the founder entered the room again, drawing a wave of applause without even trying. The contrast burned Gregory's chest. She didn't boast, didn't grandstand, yet people rose to their feet for her. Why not me? The thought tore at him. Fueled by pride and fury, Gregory stood abruptly. His chair screeched across the marble floor, drawing all eyes. Conversations halted. He stepped toward the center of the room, lifting his plaque like a sword. "You applaud her." Gregory's voice rang out, sharper than the violins behind him. "You all fawn at her feet like children before a saint. But let's not forget, without me, none of this would exist. Without my money, my influence, my name, this entire organization would still be a dream scribbled on a napkin." Gasps scattered across the room. A few exchanged horrified looks. Others smirked, enjoying the spectacle. The founder rose slowly but said nothing, her eyes fixed on Gregory with calm restraint. You think vision matters? Gregory continued, his voice growing louder, edged with desperation. Vision is nothing without execution, and execution costs money, my money. You cheer for her, but it's me you owe. His voice cracked on the last word, the polished mask slipping at last. For a long beat. The room was silent. Then a young man near the back called out, If money's all you have, then it's all you'll ever be. Laughter followed, louder than before, no longer muffled whispers but open mockery. Gregory's face flushed crimson. He slammed the plaque onto a table, shattering a glass. Wine splashed across the white tablecloth like blood. Ungrateful parasites. He roared, Every last one of you. The security staff moved instinctively, stepping closer but hesitating. After all, this was Gregory Steele until tonight, untouchable. Charles grabbed his arm. Gregory, enough. You're making a fool of yourself. Gregory yanked away, his voice breaking. No, I built this. I made all of you. And now you laugh? The founder finally spoke, her voice calm but firm, carrying across the room with more weight than his fury ever could. You mistake fear for respect, Gregory. And tonight, fear has left the room. Her words struck him harder than any fist. Audience murmured agreement, some even nodding openly. The tide had shifted fully. Gregory stumbled back, chest heaving, eyes darting wildly around the room. Faces blurred together, not in admiration but in judgment. For the first time, he saw himself as they did. A desperate man clinging to a crown that no longer existed. He turned toward Charles, searching for support. But Charles's expression was weary, his loyalty fraying. Greg, he said quietly, you can't scream people into respect, not anymore. The final thread snapped. Gregory stormed from the ballroom, the doors slamming behind him with a thunder that echoed through the stunned silence. Out in the hallway, his breath came ragged. The walls seemed to close in, the echoes of laughter, chasing him like wolves. He tore off his tie, his plaque clutched limply in one hand, its shine mocking him. He pressed his back against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the polished floor. For the first time in years, Gregory Steele felt small. The applause, the whispers, the power gone in an instant. And he knew, deep in the hollow pit of his chest, that this was only the beginning of his fall. Morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of Gregory Steele's penthouse, but it brought no warmth. He sat hunched in his leather armchair, still wearing last night's tuxedo, the bow tie torn loose around his neck. The plaque rested on the coffee table in front of him, its once proud shine now dulled under the smear of fingerprints and spilled. Whiskey. The television on the wall blared with a familiar face, his own. News anchors replayed clips from the gala. His trembling voice, his red face, the shattered glass, the founder's calm rebuke. Every network had the footage. Every headline screamed humiliation. Gregory Steele's public breakdown. From power broker to outburst, fear no longer commands respect. Gregory gripped the remote, knuckles white. He hurled it across the room, shattering a vase. Shards scattered like his reputation. Phone buzzed relentlessly on the counter. Calls from investors. Messages from board members. He couldn't bear to answer. Finally, Charles entered, his suit impeccable as always, though his eyes betrayed sleepless hours. He shut the door behind him quietly. You've seen it? Charles asked. Gregory laughed bitterly. Seen it? I can't escape it. The world eats my shame for breakfast. Charles poured himself a glass of water and sat opposite him. It's not just bad press, Greg. It's fallout. Sponsors are reconsidering contracts. Donors are pulling out. People don't want to be attached to This. He gestured at the television. Gregory leaned forward, teeth bared. They owe me loyalty. Charles shook his head slowly. No. They bought influence. And when influence becomes embarrassment, they cash out. The words landed like blows. For years, Gregory had imagined himself untouchable, a fortress of wealth and power. But now the walls were cracking. And worse, people were watching. Later that afternoon, Gregory forced himself to attend a board meeting downtown. He arrived in his black sedan, flanked by assistants who avoided eye contact. The moment he stepped into the glass conference room, conversations died. Dozens of eyes followed him, some nervous, others coldly calculating. The founder sat at the far end serene, as though she had already anticipated this moment. Gregory placed his plaque on the Sergas Aderivonden table, its clang echoing. Before we begin, let's get one thing straight. I am not stepping down. No one had asked him to. But silence filled the room like an accusation. One of the senior board members, a silver-haired woman with a reputation for never wasting words, leaned forward. Gregory, no one questions your contributions, but last night, it reflected poorly on us all. We cannot afford instability, Gregory sneered. Instability? That woman, he jabbed a finger toward the founder, has poisoned your minds. I've carried this organization for years, and you're ready to throw me aside because of one emotional evening? The founder finally spoke, her tone calm but unyielding. It wasn't just one evening, Gregory. It was a mirror. And everyone saw the truth in it. A murmur of agreement swept the room. Gregory's voice rose, sharp with desperation. You think you can survive without me? You think you'll stand on vision alone? Vision doesn't pay bills. Vision doesn't build empires. I am the engine. Here, and engines don't get replaced. Charles shifted uncomfortably beside him, but said nothing. Another board member, younger, bold, broke the silence. Engines get replaced all the time, especially when they catch fire. Laughter rippled through the room. Gregory slammed his fist onto the table. You'll regret this, all of you. But his threats no longer landed. Instead of fear, the faces around him showed something far worse: relief. Relief that his grip was loosening. That evening, the story escalated further. Social media turned his outburst into endless memes. Clips of his shouting were spliced into comedy skits, hashtags trending worldwide. #Steele meltdown, #fear is not, respect his. Fortress of intimidation had become a circus. At home, Gregory stood at the window, staring out at the city he once commanded. His reflection in the glass looked older, smaller, beaten. Charles approached cautiously. Greg, you need to address this. Publicly, an apology. Gregory spun around, eyes blazing. Never. I will not grovel. I will not crawl like a dog for their forgiveness. Charles hesitated. Then you'll lose everything. For a moment, the words hung heavy in the air. Gregory turned back to the window. Better to lose everything than to admit I was wrong. His voice was steady, but inside, a storm raged. For the first time, Gregory Steele wondered if the fortress he had built had never been real at all. Only a cage. And now, the bars were bending. Rain hammered against the tall glass windows of Gregory Steele's penthouse, streaking the city lights into blurred smears of color. He stood in the shadows, his shirt unbuttoned, hair disheveled, hands trembling as he scrolled through the endless cascade of headlines on his phone. Steele's allies cut ties. Power brokers' influence fades. Public meltdown sparks. Resignations. Each headline struck like a hammer against his chest. Each article chipped away at the fortress of reputation he had built brick by brick, deal by deal, intimidation by intimidation. Lies, he muttered to himself, though the word carried no weight. He tossed the phone onto the sofa and reached for a glass of scotch, His fifth that evening. Charles entered quietly, carrying a folder. His expression was grim. "Greg, you need to see this." Gregory didn't move. "Another hit piece?" Charles shook his head and set the folder on the coffee table. "Worse, resignations. 3 of your senior partners. They've formally withdrawn. There's citing. Loss of confidence in leadership." Gregory barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Cowards, feeding on scraps of rumor like rats." Charles sat down across from him, leaning forward. "It's not rumor, it's perception. And perception is reality in our world. You used to own fear. Now fear has turned on you." The words landed like bullets. Gregory slammed his glass down, spilling liquor onto the table. "I made these. Man, I built this empire. Without me, they're nothing." But even as the words left his mouth, he heard how hollow they sounded. The next morning, Gregory forced himself into action. He called an emergency press conference, hoping to seize control of the narrative. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium in a crisp suit, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. The room was packed. Journalists, bloggers, even rival executives who had come to witness the spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory began, his voice deep, commanding, "there has been a campaign of lies and distortions aimed at tearing me down. I will not stand for it. My record speaks for itself. My success, my influence unmatched. You cannot erase a legacy built over decades with a few edited clips." For a brief moment, he felt the old power stir within him, the commanding presence, the iron tone. Then a reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Steele, is it true that several of your key donors and board members have resigned within the last 24 hours? Murmurs rippled through the room. Gregory stiffened. "Those are baseless rumors." Another reporter shouted, "We have official statements. Care to respond?" Laughter erupted, cameras clicking furiously. Gregory's face flushed red. He slammed his fist onto the podium. "You vultures, feeding off weakness like parasites. None of you would dare breathe without men like me paving the way." The room erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions, flashes blinding his eyes, murmurs of, "He's losing it again." Gregory stormed off the stage, the sound of laughter chasing him down the hallway. That night, the news cycle feasted on his collapse. Clips of his outburst went viral. Satirical shows parodied him mercilessly. His brand of fear had become comedy. Fodder. Back at his penthouse, Gregory paced like a caged animal. Charles sat silently in the corner, exhaustion etched into his features. Finally, Charles spoke. "Greg, listen to me. It's over. The board is preparing a vote. They want you out. And this time, I can't stop them." Gregory stopped pacing, his eyes wild. "You? My right hand, my ally. You betray me too?" Charles rose, his voice heavy. "I've stood by you longer than anyone. But loyalty doesn't survive a sinking ship. And Greg, you're sinking fast." The words sliced deeper than betrayal. They cut into the very identity Gregory had built. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the desk for support. For the first time, he saw it clearly. The fortress he thought he commanded was crumbling. Not because of enemies, not because of betrayal, because of himself. The following days brought a storm. Resignations turned into public denunciations. Contracts dissolved overnight. Investments evaporated. Even his private security detail once fiercely loyal began to disappear one by one. The fortress walls were collapsing. And Gregory, once the architect, was now buried under the rubble. Late one night, alone in the dimly lit penthouse, Gregory stood before the mirror. His reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, lips trembling. He no longer recognized the man before him. The plaque from the gala sat on the counter. He picked it up, staring at the engraved words, once a symbol of power, now a relic of everything he had lost. For the first time in his life, Gregory Steele whispered the truth aloud, "I'm afraid." And the sound of his own voice, stripped of arrogance, broke him. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Dark clouds pressed low over the city, drowning its skyline in shadows. Gregory Steele sat alone in his penthouse, curtains drawn, a half empty bottle of scotch by his side. The once untouchable kingpin of power now looked like a ghost of himself disheveled, unshaven, and beaten by the silence that filled his once bustling empire. Every phone had stopped ringing. Every ally had walked away. The fortress he had built had not been destroyed by rivals, but by the hollowness within himself. A knock echoed through the cavernous room. Gregory stiffened. He wasn't expecting anyone. "Go away," he barked, his voice hoarse, but the knock came again, calm, deliberate. With shaky legs, Gregory rose and opened the door. Standing there, drenched in rain, was Darius, the boy. The one he had mocked, humiliated, tried to crush. But he wasn't just a boy anymore. He stood tall, his posture unyielding, his eyes steady, filled with a quiet strength Gregory had never possessed. For a long moment neither spoke. The storm outside roared, lightning flashing behind Darius like a crown of fire. Gregory forced a laugh, though it cracked under the weight of fear. "Come to gloat, have you? To spit on the ruins?" Darius stepped inside, calm as ever. "No, I came too." "And this?" Gregory staggered back, heart pounding. "And this? What do you mean?" Darius looked around the penthouse, the shattered glass, the discarded papers, the trophies collecting dust. All this power, all this fear, and what did it get you? Alone, broken, terrified of shadows. Gregory bristled, trying to summon his old menace. "I'm still Steele. I made this city tremble. Men like you boys, like you, will never understand." Darius's voice cut through him like steel. "You're wrong. I understand perfectly, because I was the one you tried to break. But I didn't. I rose. I trained. I endured. And I learned something you never did. True strength doesn't come from fear. It comes from control." Gregory's breath quickened. His hands trembled. For the first time in decades, he felt truly small. Suddenly, the penthouse doors burst open. A flood of reporters, cameras, and former allies streamed in. Charles was among them, grim-faced, carrying a folder of evidence. "Gregory Steele," Charles announced, his voice echoing. "Your reign is over. The board has voted. Law enforcement has your files. You're finished." Gregory spun in panic, sweat dripping down his temples. "You can't do this to me. I made you, all of you." But no one flinched. The cameras kept rolling. The city was watching. Darius stepped forward, his calm presence commanding the room. He looked Gregory in the eye and said, "This isn't your story anymore. It's mine." The collapse happened in seconds. Gregory lunged, trying to grab the folder from Charles. But his legs gave out, his body crumbling under the weight of years of arrogance and fear. He fell to his knees, gasping, humiliated in front of the world. The cameras captured everything. Gregory Steele, the man who built an empire of intimidation, reduced to a desperate, broken figure. Darius stood over him, silent but resolute. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then Gregory whispered, almost to himself, "I'm afraid." It was the same confession he had made in the mirror, but now it was heard by the world. And with those words, his empire shattered completely. Weeks later, the city moved on. Steele's empire was dismantled piece by piece. His allies faced trials, his properties were seized, his name became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and classrooms alike. But in the midst of that fall, A new figure rose. Darius. He didn't rise with arrogance or greed. He rose with discipline, humility, and the quiet strength forged from years of enduring pain and mockery. He became a symbol not of fear, but of resilience. Schools invited him to speak. Community leaders sought his guidance. Young kids who once felt powerless looked at him and saw hope. The boy who was mocked had become the man who inspired. One evening, Darius stood at the edge of the city, the sun setting behind the skyline. Charles approached him, hands in his pockets. "You know," Charles said quietly, "Steele used to look at this city and think it belonged to him, that everyone was a pawn in his game." Darius nodded, his gaze steady. "That's the difference." He wanted to own it. "I just want to protect it." Charles smiled faintly. "You're not like him. And that's why you'll never fall the way he did." Far away in a cold prison cell, Gregory Steele sat hunched, staring at the concrete floor. No cameras, no trophies, no empire. Just silence. He whispered the same words again and again, rocking slightly as the walls closed in. "I'm afraid. I'm afraid. I'm afraid." But no one was left to hear him. Meanwhile, outside those walls, Darius walked forward into a new future. The storm had passed, and with it, a new dawn had begun. The boy mocked by bullies. The boy underestimated by a giant. The boy who rose stronger. Now, the man who stood unshaken. And this time, the world would never forget his name.